And we're live. What's up, everyone? We're back in 2022 with a running start for Cosmos so far. Never been a better time to launch an app chain than this year. You're listening to Interchain FM. If you're seeking alpha and Cosmos, look no further. I'm your host, Chango Unchained. And today we are here with Harry Halpin on the podcast. Harry is the founder of Nym, and he's one of the OG cypherpunks in the space. Welcome to the show, Harry.
Yes, thanks for the introduction. I am a founder of Nym and a strong believer in crypto-anarchist ideology or philosophy, let's say. And happy to discuss all of the latest movements we've made in the last few months, a lot of which have been quite large. And happy to explain also to people just what Nym is and why network privacy is important, because everyone gets very obsessed with zero knowledge, but people leave the rest of the privacy stack out.
Right, fair enough. So, okay, all right, I just want to disambiguate this because this is pretty important to me. You, I think, are considered a cypherpunk and a crypto anarchist. I don't consider myself a cypherpunk, but a crypto anarchist. Can you disambiguate the two?
Yeah. So how I disambiguate the two is I tend to disambiguate the two by noting that crypto-anarchism is a variant of anarchism, which is very old philosophy, far predates cryptography, came out, was part of the First International, came out of essentially in the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s. So this is Pierre Proudhon, and then followed by, let's say, depending who you talk about, Eli Reclus or Kropotkin. And anarchism basically believes that domination in any form restricts human freedom, and that we should maximize human freedom and autonomous self-development. And the main blockers to human freedom, there are quite a few. There's the state being one, and this is the disagreement between anarchists and, say, Marxists. And then also there is the theory of crypto-anarchism, which basically says we can use technology, in particular cryptography, to essentially make the state less necessary and less powerful and less ripe for corruption and abuse. So that's crypto-anarchism. Cypherpunk, most of the same people. So you associate, for example, crypto-anarchism with some great people, Jude Milhoon, for example, so maybe not so wonderful people like Tim May. Cypherpunk, you might want to just disambiguate a bit by looking at like Eric Hughes' Cypherpunk Manifesto. I would associate Cypherpunk with also the Tor founders of Roger Dingeldine and others who are not necessarily crypto-anarchists, but what they might be. But what you would say with cypherpunks is that they're very interested in privacy. Privacy is the ability to selectively disclose oneself to the world, as put in the Cypherpunk Manifesto by Eric Hughes. And they tend to be less overtly political than I would say crypto-anarchists, more focused on, cypherpunks don't write books or manifestos. They say they write running code. And so to get a bit of a more, I would say, practical ideology. But it does also, it has obviously political ramifications as well. So typically you merge these two terms.
Mm-hmm. And then there's a further subset, which is crypto syndiclism. And
I haven't seen that yet. I guess like Nathan Schneider's like weird co-op stuff could go that way. Who knows? There's a million different weird political philosophies in crypto. And I think one of the strengths of the space is that it's actually very politically open. So if you talk to people in like traditional libertarian spaces or traditional anarchist spaces, they're very often dogmatic. And I do think the one thing we can learn from the cypherpunks and from the internet in general and code in general is that we really need to focus on what pragmatically works today, not a kind of utopian vision of a future society.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you were friends with Amir Taaki, right? I actually imagined that he was more of a crypto syndicalist rather than an anarchist, but
no, he's perhaps more of a crypto anarchist than myself. I'm more of a traditional anarchist.
like
So Amir, I met Amir, correct me, 2012. And he was one of the first people that told me about Bitcoin. I remember Bitcoin came by my inbox, the Cypherpunk mailing list, which is quite a crazy place, and I didn't honestly pay it too much attention. And I asked my friend Ben Laurie, who's now at Google and advising Nym. I said, Ben, is Bitcoin, do you think this makes sense? He's like, well, I have a paper showing that proof of work doesn't work. And I said, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. So I guess it doesn't make sense. I ignored it for a number of years. And then, I started taking it seriously when I met young people like Amir, who were very much pushing cryptocurrency as a revolutionary technology. And Amir is also the first person to point out a lot of the privacy problems. So with his work on Dark Wallet, I remember he was discussing CoinJoin, stealth addresses, and all of this. And I felt it was, I looked at it and I said, well, it's not even clear if proof of work works. I've actually changed mine. I actually think proof of work does work pretty well.
Yeah.
But I felt pretty shaky on the privacy properties of Bitcoin. A lot of people did mistakenly believe pseudonyms somehow defended you. And my PhD is not in cryptography. It's in artificial intelligence. And so therefore I'm quite familiar with machine learning. I said, well, there's no way that a machine learner can't de-anonymize these pseudonyms. And so I said, well, Amir would be great. I was trying to get people to do PhDs at the time. I was a researcher, first at MIT and then Université Paris. So I had a lot of research money. And I was always looking for bright young people. We're still looking at Nym for bright young people to do PhDs in cryptography. And I said, well, maybe we should get some academics on this, because I felt some of the design choices I wasn't quite so sure of. And I ended up being right. It took a number of years for all that stuff to come through. But now we see a true explosion of work on, for example, zero knowledge systems. And so I really do think Amir was the first to spot all of the problems. And then over the last 10 years, to be honest, a number of academics have come in and proposed nice systems, and a number of awesome cypherpunks and companies have even built some of those systems, looking at confidential transactions in Liquid, to Zcash, to all the craziness going on Ethereum and now Cosmos.
Right. And your background also consists of working at the W3C, but you did resign because of their DRM standardization. Can you talk more about that?
I mean, I have a lot of respect for the W3C insofar as that I do think it was a sort of Knights of the Round Table that were really trying very hard to keep the web an open platform. But the problem is when you're trying to make a public good, such as the original web, the Web 1, I mean, we're not even getting to Web 3 yet. There's a lot of problems. And one problem is there's a lot of monopolies that would like to control the web, and there's a lot of money in controlling the web. And so W3C would be where Google and Facebook and Twitter all came to essentially solve their problems. And one of the problems we had, the one that I was in charge with, was lack of cryptography access in browsers. So I did the W3C Web Cryptography API, which is very conservatively designed API. It doesn't handle a lot of the stuff that people want to do now on the web. And now we're seeing WebAssembly do that work, which is great, although sometimes dangerous. And at W3C, unfortunately, at some point, it was a membership-based organization, and it ran out of money. Or at least was not doing so great. And so when Netflix comes to get up and Google decides they're right, after resisting DRM for a very long time, wants to push digital rights management, essentially preventing you from streaming Netflix without paying, the problem is that you're basically forced to put key material on people's computers. But unlike in cryptography, where the key is considered somehow self-sovereign, that it's my key, therefore it's my Bitcoin, or it's my key, it's my validator on Cosmos. The key is actually controlled by a third party. And that's quite, I found that ethically objectionable. The EFF also objected. The Free Software Foundation objected. There were protests. We were unfortunately unable to convince the W3C to not standardize DRM. So now we all have DRM in our browsers, and I left. But that was a great thing for me because it got me out of MIT and got me back into looking at mass surveillance. And to be honest, I've learned much more. And we've built much more working on mass surveillance than we could have ever done in the constraints of the web browser space.
So going back to Web 1, before there was even the W3C, how did something like that emerge and become such a powerful actor such that they could determine what becomes standardized? going forward?
Yeah, so standards are pretty complicated. And essentially the way to think about them is that, you have to convince various parties that there's more to be gained from interoperability than from not being interoperable. It's actually quite a hard thing to claim. Most of these companies, such as Google and Facebook, are what you call monopoly capitalists. They get their power not from innovation. I mean, come on, what has Google done recently? Not so much. Facebook, I mean, this metaverse stuff, it's not even deploying anything new. Hasn't deployed anything new for years. But they get their power because they're monopolies, and they get monopolies by building walled gardens around users to prevent users from leaving their platform, and they advertise at them or whatever, which essentially is advertising is surveillance. It's based on surveillance in the modern web. And so standards, you have to make an argument that actually it's somehow better to be interoperable. And this was a very easy argument to make in the early days of the internet. The internet was basically made by a bunch of grad students and hackers, probably not that different, although again, this is all pre-public key, the invention of public key cryptography in the 70s. And, the Internet Engineering Task Force, I've heard it even called, it used to be an anarcho hippie commune. It was not a bunch of just corporate guys. It was kind of just a bunch of grad students and random hackers, people that stayed up late, trying really to get things like we take for granted today, like email working, file transfer. And they were pretty successful. And the Internet Engineering Task Force is still very successful. And I do recommend that people in the blockchain space should look at their standards, use their standards, and interact in that process. Unlike the W3C, anyone can just show up at Internet Engineering Task Force meetings. Decisions are made by consensus, although they don't have on-chain consensus. They hum in a room together, or God knows, I don't know what's going on now with COVID. And it's quite a cool process. And that's what gave us the initial internet stack. But the problem with the initial internet stack is that, cryptography was a military secret. So people didn't have access. Vint Cerf basically said that they had to fork the internet to make a private internet for the military that had cryptography involved, and the public internet did not have cryptography involved. So what happened with the rise of e-commerce is Netscape and other companies came together. They kind of bolted on, not particularly well sometimes, cryptography onto the internet. That's why you have things like Ben Laurie's wonderful work on OpenSSL that lets you get you that little block, that little lockbox in your browser. That's all came kind of in the 90s. That led, of course, to the web taking off, and then my work on getting cryptography into JavaScript. This took a very time, and to be honest, it's very ugly. And so I think the nice thing that the blockchain space has going for it is there's no clear monopolies yet. There's not a single dominant company running things. We can talk about Cosmos and Jaquan also. I think Cosmos has shown that their ecosystem can survive key actors leaving. And that this builds a more stronger, resilient system. However, where I think the blockchain space could use a bit more standards, and when you talk about blockchain interoperability, you had vastly different people and different companies, often who are very much against each other, building essentially cross-internet standards. And so you want to build cross-chain standards or just new cryptography standards in general for stuff that the old-fashioned web hasn't got around to looking at, like zero-knowledge proofs, or even Sphinx, the packet format that we at Nym use. It's also used by Lightning Network. I think we're going to have to engage both with traditional standards bodies, who also do nice things like clear out patents and whatnot, and engage in our own kind of new standards bodies that really try not just to build standards in between, let's say, I don't know, two Cosmos chains, although that's cool. It's a good place to start. But what you need is Cosmos, you need interoperability between, for example, radically different ecosystems as well, both transfer of assets from, let's say, traditional payment providers to blockchain, to Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin to other technologies. And this I feel we're a little bit behind on. But again, it's very early days. It took the Internet Engineering Task Force like years to get its act together. The World Wide Web Consortium was founded pretty immediately after the web started getting big, but it took kind of years to really get HTML5 out there. And so, I do think standards also do take time.
How far into the future do you imagine a blockchain World Wide Web Consortium analog would emerge? And given what you know about the existing bridging technologies today, which do you think is most likely to become the interchain standard of the future?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm not actually a cross-chain expert. We're still playing with a lot of IBC work, so I'm not going. I have to defer to my CTO Dave there, who's much more deep into that work. I would say that's very early days for bridges, so I would at least wait 2 or 3 years to see how it all pans out. There'll be hacks that we don't see coming. Typically, the standard that wins is the simplest one. And it also has to have support by the majority of large ecosystems or companies in the case of W3C. I do think there's an interesting choice of if blockchain technologies should go with a W3C, should go with traditional bodies. So for example, you see the decentralized identifier work happening there. I'm very much against that work. I think there's nothing worse than putting my personal identity on a blockchain or my keys, my public keys on a blockchain. It just seems to be a bad idea. Somehow people they're like, oh, it's self-sovereign. I'm like, it's self-sovereign and allows easy surveillance by people that you may not want to know your personal data. And there's a lot of kind of zero knowledge work there, but it's all hand waving as far as I can see. And it's also backed by companies I personally dislike, such as IBM and Microsoft. But on that being said, like I said, I think the blockchain world should bridge with the IETF, the Internet Engineering Task Force, because they really have a huge reservoir of crypto implementation experience. Some of the work that they did, for example, on TLS, like in that lock in your browser with formal verification, is far ahead of anything happening in the blockchain space today. I think we could learn a lot in the blockchain space from the IETF, and that maybe that certain amounts of blockchain technology could be standardized there. We could also spin up our own standards body. Again, it's just like the web. In the beginning of the web, you had Netscape. You had IE trying to kill Netscape. You had a fragmentation of HTML. So I think it's naturally a part of the ecosystem that you see some level of fragmentation in the beginning as various ecosystems or companies, in the case of the original web, make kind of power grabs, land grabs, just trying to get more developers interested in their work. And then over a few years, you naturally see consolidation. That consolidation does slow down innovation, I might add, but it also builds a solid foundation that new innovation can be built on. And I don't think we're quite at the space. I mean, I think Bitcoin's pretty solid. I think everything else, Tendermint PBFT, which essentially is, I think, the Liskov PBFT. This is actually all quite solid. That's one of the reasons why we like Cosmos at Nym. But that being said, things just take time, and you can't really speed up the process, I think.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think we are right now for the blockchain space compared to where we were in Web 1? I've heard that we are in the 1990s, but with more from an investor perspective, but from a tech perspective, I don't see that we yet have a network of networks yet with respect to having standardization. And so I've also heard that we are in the 1980s of Web 1. Yeah. Where do you think we are?
I would say more in the 90s. People, I mean, HTML wasn't fully standardized. It didn't exist in the 80s, but I think it's more about community, right? So I think we're in the 80s in terms of the fact that in the 90s, the web browser took off and a lot of people started using it. We haven't got, except again, maybe with Bitcoin as an investment vehicle, which now you could even access over Fidelity with Grayscale. I mean, it's pretty accessible in most jurisdictions. With that exception, I think we are not at the point where we have widespread community usage. We don't have, I don't know, my mom and dad using Cosmos for anything. They're still, they're skeptical, somewhat like myself, even of Ethereum. So I think in the community aspect, we're maybe the 80s. In terms of investment standardization, I think we're more in the early 90s. So pre-large standards bodies. But we do have things that work. Things we're starting to work in the 90s. And I think most importantly, the 90s, it took a while for HTML to finally kind of get standardized properly. And I think we're at that stage. We're still, but there's still so much potential. The investment is there. The hype is there. And, I was a quite young teenager in the 90s, so I missed a lot of that. But I do remember BBSs and IRC and whatnot, and that's how I got involved in a lot of stuff. But I think we're seeing that we're at that stage. I think we're in maybe the 80s in terms of community and the 90s in terms of actual tech and standards.
Got it. So let's segue to Nym and the Cosmos app chain that you have built. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, before going that, I do want to say that the cypherpunks, maybe this is a good way to explain, and the crypto-anarchists, even the 90s, when this technology like barely worked or often didn't work at all, they were predicting that this technology would be used for political purposes, and that it would lead to revolutionary changes, and that one of the big problems that they saw coming, they saw it before it even happened in the 90s, was that mass surveillance would be a problem. And so they could be considered three main problems that the early cypherpunks crypto anarchists were interested in tackling. The first problem, which everyone knows about, is digital cash, right? So that's the one where Bitcoin kind of comes out, and then we see other descendant systems, Cosmos is in that category. Then there's a second problem, which people didn't really, or just kind of waking up to, and this is where Nym comes in, is the problem of metadata and surveillance. That essentially, if all your transactions are digital, maybe they're even self-surveilled on a blockchain because you write every transaction down on a blockchain, then it's very easy for third parties to surveil those transactions, use them against you. This was viewed as a huge danger, particularly from nation states in the 90s before it even happened, right? So the NSA was, to my knowledge, in the 90s, I talked to Roger about this once, barely aware the internet existed, but eventually they got really into it, right? And then we had the Snowden leaks, which explained all of that. And the third problem, which is something that Nym is working on in the Cosmos ecosystem under the, we call it, it's anonymous credentials. So, if you can imagine, I would like to make a financial transaction private, and I would like to hide that financial transaction even from adversaries like nation states or companies like Chainalysis that can observe an entire network. You may also want to do that with other kinds of information. You may want to do that with personal information. I may want to prove that I'm a citizen of a country so I can vote, but I don't want you to know who I'm voting for or when I'm voting even. I just need to know that you didn't know that I voted. Or, I'm very critical of COVID passports. They're a terrible idea. And one of the reasons they're terrible is that it discloses too much info. Why do you need to know my birth date when I'm trying to access public space or cross a border? You need to know if I've been vaccinated or not. And it's not even clear if the vaccines work anymore with Omicron. But you could imagine, and we actually just built a prototype of this. You can imagine anonymous credential technology, which is just a generalization of privacy enhanced David Chaumian eCash to be used for kind of general purpose information. Now, it's not general purpose in the same way that zero knowledge was. None of the zero knowledge stuff really existed very well. And I think it was just one or two research papers in the 90s. But it's similar. The way to think about it is that zero knowledge systems, unlike anonymous credential systems, are capable of generic computation. So they're sort of, for lack of a better word, Turing complete. You can put whole C programs in there. When I was at MIT, Madars, who was working on libsnarks that led to Zcash, was in the office across the street. We would hang out a lot. Anonymous credentials are more limited. The way to think about them is they're arrays. If you have a program, you've seen a JSON array probably at some point in your life. So it's just like a list of strings or integers, and you can prove things about that, but you can't do generic computations on that. And that's what anonymous credential system provides you. And so these are the three main things that the cypherpunks thought would be necessary to stop totalitarianism with the rise of ubiquitous internet access. And Nym is currently focused on the second two. We digital cash in terms of financial transfers is decently well solved by Bitcoin, although it has privacy issues, obviously, which can be solved by sidechains or whatever, zero knowledge proofs. And Cosmos solves general purpose blockchain technology, which we quite like because it lets us make anonymous credentials that use blockchains. But what we've seen is that a lot of people get very obsessed with zero knowledge systems. They want to make, for example, zero knowledge DeFi. That's what Amir is working on. I think that's what Penumbra is working on. It's a great topic. I'm sure there'll be an explosion of amazing systems. I'm of course, I'm quite a fan of Amir's system, but all these systems are like building a castle on sand. If every time, it doesn't matter if I'm using a zero knowledge statement on chain, or if I'm using confidential transactions, homomorphic encryption, choose your poison here. It doesn't matter if every time I send a transaction the network communication, the fact that I'm talking to you or I sent this transaction at a particular time, that I sent this transaction at all is easily detectable by anyone who who could be watching my internet connection. And you're like, well, who would be watching my internet connection? But indeed, it's incredibly easy. I can watch almost anyone's internet connection by just opening a program called Wireshark. Your ISP is definitely watching your internet connection. If your chain analysis is watching, I don't know if they're watching Cosmos yet, but they're definitely watching Bitcoin. And, it's quite easy for particularly nation state actors to get this technology. It's very easy to store and then use machine learning on top of network level data. And so the way to think about it is that blockchain systems essentially are built on peer-to-peer transfers, including Cosmos. I think Cosmos is a UDP peer-to-peer protocol. I just need to check. And that this peer-to-peer broadcast, so, everyone wants to know who's the leader in a leader election-based system, or what's the status of the chain and what's the consensus on the chain. This peer-to-peer broadcast is done completely in the open. So when I do a transaction, I reveal to the whole world that I've done this transaction. I reveal my IP address, which can track me down to my neighborhood. I reveal the time I did this transaction. I reveal, and if I do most transactions are pretty complicated. So there's a pattern of transactions that identifies me as uniquely as a fingerprint. And it does not matter what you do on chain unless you build privacy on top of your network data so that you are not linkable. You cannot be linked to particular network level transactions. And that's what Nym is working on. We think that's a quite important and generic infrastructure.
Absolutely. So for anonymous credentialing, is that a drop-in replacement for something like DID?
Not really, because it could be used for all the use cases. And I think it's a much better solution. We actually had a huge argument with the European Commission on this, and we got kicked out of a European Commission project for disagreeing with DIDs. Figure. There's definitely strong lobbyists going for it, and I know they're working with IATA and other vaccine passport-friendly travel industry lobbies. That being said, the most important, I think a lot of people get excited by DIDs because you want to have a notion of identity, but it's important. Identity is actually a really hard problem. It took the internet ages to even get basic things like OAuth, which is used for Google sign-on, working. And I do think that anonymous credentials, while not mature yet, have a nice aspect to them, which is that they let you basically transfer data off-chain. That's very important. So you're not necessarily putting anything on-chain that's very valuable. And again, somewhat similar to, let's say, a zero-knowledge system. The only thing you have to put on chain is a nullifier, and you only have to do that in case if there's double spending problems. So, for example, if you're sending something that you might not want to use twice, or if something expires at a certain date. So they're pretty. It's a pretty cool technology. I'm actually kind of surprised more people in the blockchain space aren't working on it. But such is life. It's a little bit obscure unless you've done a little bit of academic work in the space. But we will plan to bring, and we already have released the code. It's not anonymous credentials to the Cosmos ecosystem. We got a grant from Interchain to develop it. I know Polkadot's also interested in this technology. And we've built pretty generic Rust and Go libraries for it. And we do think that even though maybe it's not as exciting as some of the latest CK stuff, again, I'm an old standards guy. I'm conservative. I want works well and works now rather than absolutely amazing and may work in the distant future. And so I really do think that we'll have anonymous credentials working this year for anyone that might want them on the Cosmos ecosystem. And that will allow all sorts of kind of personal database stuff to be done in a way which has a good amount of privacy. And you combine that with network level privacy, you have actually a quite cool what we call full stack privacy system, or holistic privacy, where you're preventing leaks a different part of the system. I just want to mention this really quick because a lot of people get very confused, like on-chain, off-chain, where's the privacy? Look, privacy is hard because it's a holistic property of the entire system. If you have a leak on the network layer, you can use it to de-anonymize the chain. But you can also be using amazing technology like Nym on the network level, but then, someone asks you for your name on a web form, you fill it in, you just dox yourself on the application level, right? So it really involves the entire stack. And what Nym does is we provide kind of building blocks, and particularly for the network stack, which is a total mess in blockchain systems. But we're also interested in making sure that we can actually build privacy-enhanced technologies on top of the network stack as well.
How do you have Sybil resistance if it's anonymous?
Yeah, that's a super hard question. So this actually goes back to cypherpunks. So cypherpunks have this wonderful saying, which is transparency for the powerful, privacy for the weak. And so the question is, and this has been totally confusing to some of our users recently in Nym, the real question is, who is powerful and who is weak in, let's say, Nym? So the power resides in the people who are running the mixed nodes. So let me describe a little bit how Nym works, otherwise it doesn't make sense. So how Nym works is I send some packets. I don't want anyone to observe them. I encrypt them. I chop them up so that they're the same size. And at each hop in the network, there are these mixed nodes that somewhat similar. They're essentially a proof of work system. So they're very distinct from Cosmos in this regard. They mix the packets up. If there's not enough packets, they add fake packets. They ship to another mixed node. And just like Tor, you do 3 hops. And that's enough mixing to give you pretty remarkable anonymity on a network level. And you can kind of fine tune this however you want for your application. And so you can see where there's 2 crucial dependencies in our system. One is, well, you have mixed nodes. If I'm going to send a packet to a bunch of mixed nodes, I have to know where they are. So that means I need to know an IP address. I need to know a key for them because I'm encrypting data to them. Second, the question is, how do I find those mixed nodes? So this is where Nym uses Cosmos. It's where we were using Liquid, but we ran into problems with Liquid because simplicity and smart contracts do not yet work on Bitcoin and Liquid. So we said, well, we need something that works right now. And we switched over to using Cosmos, particularly because of the WebAssembly CosmWasm smart contracts. And so what we said is we need to have a system where we can maintain the amount of reputation, and we have a Nym token for this, of each mixed node. And that based on how many packets they're mixing, they get better reputation. They do it correctly, they do it quickly, and they don't drop packets or go offline. So not only do the mixed nodes have to have some level of transparency, again, we don't need to KYC people, we don't need to know their real names, but they have to have keys and IP addresses. The user has to talk to someone to discover those mixed nodes. And that is done, if you look at Tor, there are parallelisms. That's done by talking to what's called directory authorities, essentially 7 to 11 people that run servers. And we just slot in a Cosmos blockchain as our directory authority. That directory authority tells any user, I start up my computer, I want to hide my network traffic. I need a public record of who's the good mixed nodes, where are they? And then I send I can discover that by talking to the Cosmos blockchain. And we've actually just recently decided to name our Cosmos blockchain because we were using it for so many different things. We called it Nyx, which is kind of a cool name. It's goddess of the night from ancient Greek. And also a makeup store, possibly. And so what has to be transparent to some extent in Nym? So I am going to answer the question. It's the validators, the people that are running the Cosmos chain, that tell users where the mixed nodes are, and the mixed nodes themselves. And that what the validators and mixed nodes do by virtue of mixing the packets, and the validators maintain the reputation of the mixers, is they provision privacy not to themselves. That's actually a very hard question. That's an amazing research question. I've only seen one paper that even does it halfway decently. But they provide privacy to users. And this is just like Tor and a VPN. A Tor nodes aren't anonymous. VPNs are anonymous in a strong sense. And mixed nodes and validators in Nym are not anonymous, but they provide anonymous communication to users. And so because the users are the ones that are going to be targeted. Now, it's also true the nodes may be targeted. And we have a lot of lawyers. We just hired one last week. We're not just hiring random blockchain lawyers. We're hiring lawyers that used to do Guantanamo cases and whatnot. And, our lawyers basically say, and I think they're correct, that it is legal to run a VPN. The U.S. government, is fine with Tor. It's legal to run Tor, maybe not in China. And so that, the node runners themselves don't even know what traffic they're pumping through. So the liability and the problems will fall upon users. And so that's who we're trying to protect. Now, that being said, I don't know, this may be heretical for a Cosmos blockchain, but there is work on making proof of stake networks fully anonymous, so that the validators themselves are anonymous. And the only work I've seen that I think is quite good, maybe there's probably more I haven't seen, is a system by Cardano. This Ouroboros Crisponius, I think. It's a Greek term because Aggelos Kiaios is behind it, who's Greek and who is an advisor in Nym and also works on Cardano. and it allows essentially anonymous proof of stake networks where you don't your node can be anonymous. You kind of could do a zero knowledge proof of how much stake you have, and somehow the Ouroboros protocol works out. And this looks like a cool system. It is, to my knowledge, not implemented nor planned to be implemented by anyone particularly soon. But it'd be cool if someone from Cosmos looked into this stuff. That'd be great.
Perfect. If the mix nodes are the ones that are doing the mixing, aren't they privy to that information? Don't they know the extra packets that they are putting into mix, which they know are like real traffic and fake? Like,
yeah, so it's important to remember that we use this thing called the Sphinx packet format, and that makes all the packets look identical. And at each hop, what we call re-randomize the crypto. So you get one ciphertext in, it's kind of magic, and you pull another ciphertext out, but the same key can still decrypt both ciphertexts, essentially adding an exponent. And so the Sphinx packet format was invented for mixnets by our co-founding research scientist, George Denises, who went to Facebook and came back. We're very happy about that. And the Sphinx packet format basically prevents the kinds of attacks that you're worried about, insofar as that to a mixed node, it all looks the same because you create these Sphinx packets on your computer. So I create them locally, like on my laptop or my desktop. So no one outside my desktop knows like the data that I'm sending, and well, the receiver will know it when they get it. And then you make these Sphinx packets, you ship them into the mixnet, and they just see a bunch of Sphinx packets. And because of each mix, because of this mixing process, and we use a particular kind of statistical process called a Poisson process, quite clever, from Anya Petrowski, our head of research. And that this process basically says at each mix node, there's a randomized delay. This randomized delay is chosen in a way that we know on average how long it takes a packet to get through a network. So, it's not going to get stuck and just wait there forever. I mean, that would be terrible. You'll never finish your transaction. But we can sort of say, well, look, it didn't come out with an average time. Please resubmit. And because the packet goes to a mixed node and it stays at that mixed node for some randomized amount of time, and other packets are coming in, that even with no fake packets, the mixed nodes cannot distinguish the packets. They don't know what's going on. They have and to be honest, mixed nets have a much higher plausible deniability than, let's say, a VPN or Tor, where you have that traffic pattern not randomized in terms of time and traffic isn't mixed, so they can kind of see the fingerprint. That's how website fingerprinting attacks can work against things like Tor. We're actually doing a lot of studies on the differences between Tor and mixed nodes in this regards. Now, the second thing you part up, which is a very good question, is how about the fake traffic? Because the mixed node, it knows what fake traffic it put in, right? I mean, it put it in. But luckily, users can generate fake traffic. So if I'm the first mixed in the mixed network, I don't know if it's real traffic or fake traffic. In fact, we have this little part of our system called gateways, where users can talk privately to a gateway, and that gateway, even the user is offline, that gateway is always sending some low-level amount of fake traffic through the network. That's actually how we prove that the mixing's been done correctly, actually. And that low-level fake traffic basically mixed nodes don't even know when the user's on and offline, ideally, and I think that's great. The second thing is, you may know what fake traffic you put in, but you don't know what fake traffic other people put in, and that's why there's not one big mixed node. So in early mixed networks, it was kind of like one big node because no one thought about decentralization. And even though mixed networks are an amazing concept invented by David Chaum, you can imagine you have a cascade of mixed nodes. So you have like at least 3. And so fake traffic is being put in by all sorts of people. So you know less. You may know what fake traffic you put in, but you know if you're receiving fake traffic. And then furthermore, I mean, Nym is more statistical than the classical Chaumian mixnet. So we have a more like Tor-like structure. It's structured, though. It's 3-layer hops. And this basically means that not only is not just one node sending traffic to another node, or different cascades of nodes, but you have 5 to 100, I think in our current system, 300 possible mixed nodes, all of which could be adding fake traffic. So the packets get individually routed, and it's honestly pretty confusing. So we have pretty good studies on this, and our studies show that in order to actually de-anonymize packets going through a mixnet, you have to compromise not 50%, not 51, not 67 or whatever, like Cosmos. You have to compromise about 80% of the network to de-anonymize a single packet. Given that most transactions that are anyway interesting are more than one packet, it becomes really impossible to start doing de-anonymization attacks.
Got it. And is the network structured similarly to Tor in that the sequencing of nodes has like an entry and then a mixed node and then an exit node?
It's structured similarly, but even a bit more complicated, where you have a gateway, which is like your entry, but it doesn't really add privacy. There's no mixing going on. Then you have 3 mixed nodes, and then you have another gateway. And that leads to the main problem where Nym is not perhaps as interesting as Tor, where we are going to be slower, right? There's more hops, and this mixing takes time. It's more computationally intensive. So it's a trade-off function. So Tor is naturally, a lot of people would say Tor versus Nym, or in any kind of dVPN. I know some Cosmos dVPNs like Sentinel, they all sort of fit the Tor model, or Orchid on Ethereum. They're incredibly similar, but there's no actual, in my opinion, differences in terms of privacy and security between any of these dVPNs and Tor. There's some incentive structure differences, and we'll see how those pan out. But in terms of privacy, there's a big difference between privacy on a mixnet and Tor, but for many applications, Tor is probably a better pick. Anything that involves synchronous streaming, so this is stuff like web browsing, it's probably pretty good on Tor. Tor may be a local maximum. We'll see. Maybe some of these dVPNs can give it a run for its money, but I haven't been convinced. On the other hand, what a mixnet is good for is because each packet is mixed individually, routed individually, that the mixed nets are better for asynchronous kinds of use cases. So these are things like instant messaging, cryptocurrency, where people are just kind of used to waiting for a little bit for cryptocurrency transactions to come through. But also useful things like, maybe file transfer, things you can lose a few packets or they come in a bit out of order and it's okay, like audio or even maybe video streaming where there's some buffering going on. So I do think that Tor might be, and probably is definitely currently as good as you're going to get in terms of web browsers. I use the Tor web browser every day. And as soon as Nym gets enough money, we're going to give them a donation, I hope.
Great. So similarly to the Tor network, if you're running a gateway node, wouldn't you be at risk of getting a knock on the door by the feds, for example? Which
is why we suggest people run their own gateway nodes, because the Sphinx packets are made locally, and then you choose your route through the mixnet. So your gateway kind of hides your actual IP of your computer from the mix nodes. So one setup we've seen some people in Switzerland did is they run the gateway on a Raspberry Pi. Maybe you can use Tor as your first hotway in if you're really paranoid. There's a lot of layers, but there's no theoretical reason why you can't do it. And that basically makes it harder for any mixed node to figure out who you are. You can also talk directly to a mixed node. It's just kind of a bad concept, right? Because the mixed node will then kind of get your IP address. That being said, if mixed nodes are getting traffic from all sorts of gateways, it's a bit more confusing for them. You can also change your gateway for every transaction. There's a lot of options. So in terms of like the gateways being attacked, that's something we have also noticed. That's probably one of the few places we agree with some other Cosmos projects. So, we have hired Chelsea Manning recently, and that's her main work item. She clearly said, well, look, we got to really strengthen the gateway connection. So not just keep them private, but make sure they don't get corrupted. What if the device itself gets corrupted? There's all sorts of issues. Chelsea's looking at it. And so we are kind of looking at some hardware-based solutions there. In the meantime, I do think running on a Raspberry Pi and being very private about it is as good as you're going to get.
Got it. So, based on your experience with Tor, what kind of traffic have you seen go through? Just because I'm asking this for all the people who are wondering, like, oh, we're just going to be using Nym for like child porn or something like that. What's your answer to that based on what you've seen used empirically on Tor?
Well, there's a big difference between Nym and Tor, which I'm glad you brought this up, because it's so again, we imagine Nym is a better fit for cryptocurrency transactions. If I send Tor has like it's a single circuit. I do 2 Cosmos transactions. They both will get the same exit. And again, these machine learning attacks where you correlate traffic between the endpoints work a little bit better on Tor than they do on individually routing packets like Nym. But then you said, well, have you created a perfect anonymity system that is very dangerous? And of course, with great power comes great responsibility. But that also there are separations of layers. So we are a network level protocol, and we were built for applications, for example, such as Cosmos. You could have a Cosmos validator as your endpoint. In fact, I think this is something a lot of people brought, that sort of Sentry nodes in the Cosmos might be something that might be kind of cool to run over Nym, because you don't want to have the same thing that has your key and wallet. You don't want that key and IP address of that computer to be hacked. You want to have a Sentry to defend yourself, and you're participating in a Cosmos-based network. And so in that regard, one of the most interesting aspects of Nym is that we basically aren't an open internet proxy. So what open internet proxy is, it means that I can use Tor. Tor is built around web browsing. It's great at that. So I can go to any website, I can access it over Tor. Now, the world is moving to a more client-server model. So even with cryptocurrency, most people don't run full nodes. They run light clients that talk to full nodes. And so Nym has essentially what's called a service provider model, where we are imagining, so a hidden service is kind of like, for example, a kind of service provider inside of Tor. And so we are an open internet proxy. We are essentially, you can run one, we can't stop you. But we're a closed proxy system. And so this means by default, so this means that when I access Nym, I'm going to be accessing the other side, not just the open internet, but I'll be accessing them like Signal. I'll be accessing like a wallet. I'll be accessing essentially a server, and that's a client server model. And so the pressure from law enforcement or from anyone that would attack Nym, assuming the users are kept anonymous by Nym, would come down on the servers. And so service providers have to make their own choices about what kinds of traffic, what kinds of content they allow. And that's the same and honestly, in that way, it works just like the internet. You can't prevent someone from doing something completely you disagree with on the internet. And it's the same with Nym. But the people that run the servers make that decision. The mixed nodes, they don't know what they're carrying. And I think that's a good model for humanity. I'm not a huge fan of censorship. I'm very much against it, actually. And I do think that there's kind of two ways to view bad behavior on the internet. You can say, okay, we have to ban it. We have to moderate it. Moderate is just kind of another word for censorship. We have to get rid of it. We have to not let it exist. But and maybe it's just my anarchist leanings, I believe that we can reason with people, that we can win the battle of concepts. So we think as a society, or even just as an individual, that something is bad, that I disagree with it. I do think we should basically tell people they shouldn't do it, and we should explain why. And that if we indeed are correct over the long run, we'll win. And maybe that may come down to a battle of words. It may come down to a battle of force. I'm not a pacifist by any stretch of the imagination. But I think that's a better model than employing censorship. Because let's say we wanted to have a Nym network where we controlled absolutely everything. We don't want that. Part of the reason we're using Cosmos is because we don't want to even have that power. Let's say I change my mind tomorrow, I wake up and say, I would like to censor a bunch of nodes. I want to censor a bunch of services. I don't want to have that power. So when we launch, right now I do. On the testnet, I can turn things off and on all I want. But when we launch mainnet, which should be coming relatively shortly, I would say next month, I don't want to be able to turn off anything. And I don't think anyone should have that power. I think it should be on that level fully decentralized. People should make up their own choices. And we can argue with those choices. We can debate those choices. But whenever you create an architecture of censorship, you're essentially creating an architecture of surveillance and architecture of power. And that's something that we have to have decentralized systems resist.
Going back to the client-server model, is there a reasonable worry that a lot of servers will be run on something like Amazon or DigitalOcean, and there could be centralization from that respect, and then either one of those companies could shut down these servers if they wanted to?
Yeah, I think that's already happened on Ethereum. Yeah, so yeah, that's a concern. But again, I don't know, and I can't know because that's what the mixnet does. I can't know. I don't want to know who's running service providers. I don't want to know where they're running them. And if they all run them on Amazon, they get shut down. It's their fault for being idiots. That being said, this is a real problem for the mixed network, because what we don't want is you don't want the mixed network itself to all be running on DigitalOcean or Amazon and then shut down. Okay, that would be terrible. So I guess the question that we have there is how to prevent that. And we can prevent that pretty simply. And I'm actually surprised no other blockchain company has done this. Our chief scientist, Claudia Diaz, invented a cool technique called VeriLoc, verified locations, which essentially, so let's say, right now you run a Nym mixed node and you have an IP address, but maybe you're spoofing it, you're faking it. You can send packets across the internet. You can measure how long they should take. There's this wonderful command line tool called ping. And so essentially the way to think about it is we can do a lot of decentralized pinging that's kind of verifiably fair. And we can determine more or less your actual, not exact geolocation, not even your neighborhood, but kind of what country you're in. And we have published that paper. We have working code. It's working the testnet. And so we can kind of guarantee, which is something that's very nice with Nym. We haven't quite pulled off yet, but we'll pull off before mainnet, that the nodes are spread out in ways such that they are both efficient, so they mix packets correctly, but also spread out in different jurisdictions. And I think that's a super important thing. And I do hope that Cosmos, other people see this VeriLoc paper in this library and use it in their blockchain systems to make sure that their validators are adequately decentralized from a jurisdictional manner.
Makes sense. Can you talk about your proof of mixing consensus algo?
Yeah, so they're two different things, right? So again, remember we have mixed node validators. Mixed node validators are essentially, they're mixed nodes and validators. Validators are maintaining the state of the mixed nodes, and they're just running a standard consensus protocol, which is Tendermint, which I think everyone on this show should be familiar with. Very standard PBFT. And they're running a blockchain. That blockchain keeps track of the reputation as stored in Nym token of each of the mixed nodes. It gives them rewards if they mix correctly, and it also lets things like anonymous credentials based on the coconut signature scheme work. So that's where honestly, we're thinking about just turning on CosmWasm so people can upload smart contracts. Why not? We've uploaded a few. We run our rewards and our monitoring mixed nodes via CosmWasm, via WebAssembly. We built everything in Rust, compiled down the WebAssembly, run all there. And what we run on the Cosmos blockchain is actually this part of this program which determines if nodes are mixing correctly or not. And if you are an American, this doesn't happen in other countries, but I am an American, and in Switzerland, but I used to be in America. There's this thing called secret shoppers. This was a great concept, originally invented by Leif Riggy for Tor, and then talked by Jeff Burgess at Web3, and then we kind of carried onwards. And this concept says, if we have these anonymous Sphinx packets, we can add packets and no one can tell we're adding packets, and anyone can add packets, no one can add packets. And some of these packets, rather than sending actual communication data through, can be monitoring the performance of the mixed net. So you can imagine the packets going around in a big circle. If it falls, we can kind of detect that it's fallen, it's been dropped. And then that's how we can basically prove someone's mixing, because we can select the paths in a fair manner. We can send a bunch of secret shopper traffic over the network, and these secret shoppers go through the whole network. At the end of each epoch, because again, it's Cosmos, so there's an epoch-based system, we say, hey, what nodes were dropping packets and what nodes weren't? And since there's not a central authority sending those packets, all the Cosmos validators are sending those packets out. The Cosmos validators can ensure that the traffic is effectively being mixed fairly. And so that's a kind of cool system. We haven't actually, that's in the white paper. We haven't published the full spec yet, but we're working with Aggelos and Claudia on that as well.
Okay. And so when you mentioned CosmWasm, you're saying that people could leverage the Nym network for smart contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of against it, but my CTO was really into it. So I said, okay, why not? I was not, when we started looking at CosmWasm didn't really exist. And that was like a prototype, and it works really well. So it's not, the smart contracts themselves are not private. In fact, the Nix blockchain that Nym uses is not private at all by default, unless you use Coconut with it, in which case you have some private transaction capability. So just don't get confused there. But as it is just a very standard Gaia D CosmWasm chain, yeah, of course, you can just upload smart contracts there. We have a decent set of validators. We actually were looking at all the other CosmWasm chains because, originally we were hanging this whole thing off Liquid. And we said, why don't we just hang this all off, say, Juno or whatnot? And we were actually surprised. We have a fair amount of investors from Binance, A16 to Polychain. I think Figment and Chorus One are involved, a whole bunch, lots of volunteers in the community. And we ended up saying, well, we actually have, 30 to, depending how you count them and who's running at any given moment, 30 to 40 validators at any time. That's actually pretty good for a Cosmos chain. And so we can just hang Nym off of Nix, and maybe if other people want to use it for whatever reason, they can upload it as stuff as well. We have not turned on IBC yet, mainly because I have to admit I haven't looked at it carefully enough. I don't know. I have to admit I personally don't hold Atom. I mean, I like Atom Foundation. The foundation is wonderful. Sam Hart's been a pleasure to work with. I'm an American. I hold only Bitcoin. So I'm still trying to understand the financial dynamics, the traffic dynamics of opening up to IBC. But looking at projects like Agoric and whatnot, I do think there might be something there. I just have to look at it more. I'm really focused on Nym and mixnets right now. So trying to understand this multi-chain world and understanding how Nym can leverage it is still something it's very early days on.
Mm-hmm. How is this different from the secret network?
So the secret network is... Again, we offer privacy on chain only via anonymous credentials, which are the Coconut signature scheme. Secret, which Guy's an old friend. We were at MIT at the same time. I think he was over in Sandy's lab, and Sandy's also a kind of Nym supporter. And Guy was talking about Bitcoin and doing classes on it in 2016. So I remember his Enigma paper. It was originally an MPC paper, multi-party computation. It seems, I have to admit, I haven't kept very good touch with Guy. It seems like it's transformed into a SGX-based system or secure trusted hardware-based system. And we're not. We don't use any secure or trusted hardware yet. We're thinking about it on the gateways. We definitely don't use anything on chain. And so the way that Secret says what they do, so there's basically two ways to think about privacy on chain. One way is you use some sort of zero knowledge proof system or use an anonymous credential system, use pure cryptography. Another way is you use some sort of hardware-based solution, which is trusted hardware. And trusted hardware, currently the only thing really in the market, although there's a bunch of cool stuff coming from ARM and Project Oak from Google. But the only thing that works now basically is Intel SGX. This is what Signal uses. And it prevents you from accessing keys and can verify some, I think, quite limited amounts of execution. Now, I'm initially was very against SGX. I'm still basically against SGX because SGX was invented for DRM. Was not, and I hate DRM, as I've already explained, so I wasn't a huge fan of seeing weird DRM systems used for privacy. That being said, Secret's doing some great work. As it's cool, they've repurposed the terrible DRM technology to be used for privacy on a blockchain. Definitely not something I saw coming. And SGX is probably not sufficient, but it may be a very important part for privacy on chain insofar as you want some sort of defense in depth. So let's say your zero knowledge system, most people don't really understand. It's a very popular term, but most people don't understand it very well. A lot of new systems, they're not properly verified. We just spent a year making security proofs for Coconut. And that's a much more basic system than a lot of the zero knowledge systems being thrown around like Plonk, or Halo 2 or Sapling or whatever you want to do. And so, my concern be that, if your zero knowledge system breaks, it's good to have like some secure hardware there so you're not totally in the clear. But vice versa, I don't think secure hardware is enough because, the big critique of secure hardware is that, particularly with Intel SGX, you got to trust Intel. And that's not crazy. Intel made the hardware. How do you know what's in the hardware? You sure don't. And if you don't know what's in the hardware, how can you trust it? And Intel does have a kill switch in all of this stuff because what they're afraid of is crypto encrypted malware. How if someone made an SGX trusted malware worm? I mean, this would be terrible. Intel wants a big off button there, so it doesn't enable via SGX something truly that they can't control. But then at the same point, do you really want all of your, this is where I actually disagree with Signal and Mobile Coin. I don't think hardware is particularly, hardware-based solutions are particularly sufficient by themselves, because I don't really trust Intel. I don't trust Intel inside. And so I think you want to use both. And I haven't seen, and I would love to see Secret work on this. I would love to see, I don't know what else is going on in zero knowledge space and Cosmos, but I'm sure there's Penumbra, whatever. I would like to see more systems that are built on top of that claim to deliver privacy do defense in depth. And that means that they should do both network privacy via Nym or Tor or whatever makes sense for their use case, but they should also use both cryptography and as a backup secure hardware. If you really want to talk secure hardware, you should probably get Chelsea Manning on the show at some point. She's been really going deep into space in terms of the new risk stuff, but it's not really my specialty. I just have philosophical and design thoughts about it.
Yeah, that gives me Richard Stallman vibes, where he wants open and free hardware. But
yeah, but you have to. The problem is if you don't understand. I mean, computing when it first happened, like anyone could understand the whole stack, but that's not the case nowadays. So we have to depend on people to understand the stack force. That's pretty scary from a security and privacy perspective. So I do support open secure hardware. I know Tor's been working on open and secure randomness for their Tor nodes. We're hoping to take some advantage of some of that. Randomness, honestly, everything in cryptography depends on randomness. And so I think there is, even though it seems crazy, there's something to be said for open hardware. It's just a little bit out of scope for Nym. But I think Cosmos, if I were running a Cosmos validator, I would definitely want to make sure my randomness is securely generated. You've got millions, if not more, behind a key. You really want to make sure that key is not backdoored or not guessable.
Absolutely. Well, so architecturally, it sounds like there's a lot of differences between Nym and Secret Network. However, on the higher level application layer, for the developer who is deciding on which app chain to build apps on, it sounds like there's not too much of a difference, except that Secret is private by default and Nym is has anonymous credentialing.
Yeah, well, the way I think about it is actually a little bit from again, Nym has two components. We have mixnets and anonymous credentials. So we think Nym and Secret could work well together because you could use the mixnet for your network layer, and then for your blockchain layer, we don't care what you use. It's honestly, we don't even know because it's anonymous. So you could use, for example, Secret on top. I think that'd be cool. I'd love to see someone do that. I'd really encourage someone to do that. If you were choosing a chain to deploy on in terms of privacy, it just really depends how you feel. If you like secure hardware, go for Secret. That might be better choice. If you like anonymous credentials, go for Nym. If you like zero knowledge, I don't know, I think Zcash might be switching to Cosmos or something. Go for Zcash, right? So, it's at this point, we don't have very good comparisons of the space as a whole. And I think it's very hard to make educated and informed decisions. And the most important thing is to get the code out there. And I actually don't see, like I said earlier, a big contradiction between using mixed nets for I think best of breed for network, for cryptocurrency transactions is mixed nets. Best of breed for cryptography will be some form of anonymous credentials and zero knowledge proofs for actual private smart contracts. And that you'll need, particularly if open hardware comes out, you'll need some secure hardware stuff behind it. And so it's cool that people can approach these problems with 3 different R&D directions, 3 different companies, 10 different companies. It's not very mature right now. Our mixnet's mature, but we just opened up CosmWasm contracts like today, right? So I would wait a year or 2 before trying to build privacy enhanced stuff on chain. Just see how it shakes out.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you did allude to some applications that could be used on Nym, like Signal or, like on Secret, there's NFTs. So can you talk more about what sorts of applications could leverage a network like Nym?
Yeah. I mean, you could use Nym with applications today. It's not like this dream in a white paper. It's like pretty theoretically solid and practically pretty solid. So if I were going to build something on top of Nym today, we have docs, you can go do this. We have what's called a SOCKS 5 proxy. It's a standardized proxy used by VPNs, used by Tor. We also support that exact same proxy. You just start the Nym client on your computer. You have a local host port, and anything that goes to that port will go straight to Nym. So you can start Keybase, you can start, I know Blockstream Green's wallet works like this. I think Electrum, which is another Bitcoin wallet. I don't know if any, and of course the Nym wallet lets you basically, which is has the Cosmos backend, lets you basically plug and play the local host IP address into like a sort of setup in the config, and that runs all that traffic through Nym. You can run that traffic through Nym today. You can run it right through our sandbox testnet. And if you're feeling crazy, you don't really recommend it. You can even run web browser. You can open up Firefox. Chrome doesn't let you do this, but Firefox, which is what Tor browser uses, lets you actually choose a SOCKS 5 proxy in your config, and we've streamed video over Nym. It's a bit slow, but it worked. And so we think that the problem is that it's a pain for users. If I want to use Nym, I don't want to tell a user. I mean, I don't mind or power users or cryptocurrency people because they're pretty open to new technology. I don't want to say, you have to go and do this crazy cut and paste from one Nym file to like your config in your browser. I prefer to tell people that they should basically build Nym in natively so that you just start the app and your network's just private by default. It talks to the CosmWasm blockchain without even thinking, without anyone even knowing about it. I would prefer if users didn't even have to know about Nym. Nym tokens is just private by default. Maybe if they're doing a transaction in Bitcoin, they might pay a transaction fee in Bitcoin. If they're doing a transaction in Atom, maybe they pay a transaction fee in Atom. That's where the multi-chain stuff of Cosmos is quite useful. And that, regardless, these fees go to feed the mixed network. And maybe you want Signal to work for free with Nym. So maybe Moxie, or I think he just stepped down. I was just chatting with him recently. Maybe Brian Acton buys, sorry, I'm trying to remember who's running Signal now. Brian buys some access to Nym. They say, we need this much bandwidth, and just buy that ahead of time. So for the users, it's all just totally open. And I think that's a pretty good model. And that's what I would like to see Nym go in the future, these kind of native applications with things which are already privacy enhanced, things like Signal, things like Brave, wallets that advertise themselves as privacy enhanced. I haven't seen any good privacy enhanced DeFi stuff, but I think it's still early days. And I think that will be the future of Nym, is that, for the next few years, there's going to be just more and more applications doing native integrations. Because if you don't do native integrations, it's just a pain for the users.
So if I were someone from behind the Great Firewall and I wanted to leverage a Web3 application that is running on Web2 infrastructure that has been censored, could I, host it using Nym and allow people to access those websites that have been banned in the Great Firewall?
Yeah, the Great Firewall is a pretty tricky enemy. As you may or may not know, they block Tor really effectively, and Tor uses what's called obfuscation proxy based on Philip Winter's Scramble suite work. That's an incredibly great technology, and Tor deploys it today, but nonetheless, the Great Firewall of China has incredibly good machine learning and good IP address identification. So you can, if you're inside China today, you can email Tor, they'll give you what's called a anonymous proxy, and then you can eventually get it working. But this is where Nym is. Every once in a while, people are like, why do you have these gateways? What is a gateway? So a gateway, again, is the first hop into the Nym network. It's not mixing the traffic. It's just letting you obscure your initial IP address through one more layer. And that's pretty cool. But it has some other uses that we haven't really talked about. So for example, if you're trying to get out of, let's say, a place that's under censorship, you need to hide that first layer, that first hop. That first hop is the hop that gets detected and gets you shut down and censored. So the question is, how do you hide that first hop? And there's two methods. One is the one obfuscation, which we talked about earlier, where you try to pretend, it's not Nym, it's like something else, right? It's pretend it's domain fronting, depend it's going to Google, depend it's normal HTTPS traffic. The other philosophy, which no one has really explored, but I honestly think blockchain people should really explore, is looking at not just peer-to-peer traffic, but noticing that in places like China, they don't block all VPN traffic. They only block VPNs, which they are used by people who they politically identified as dissidents, and they block VPN traffic that's used by kind of more than 30 people. Soon as we talk a lot to Mask Network, Suji Yan in particular. We've talked to Naomi Wu about this. We've talked to quite a few Chinese hackers on this. And it seems like, and this is what I do when I go to China, I start a shadow sock server. I run it on a little VPS, and I've never been blocked. I'm the only one that uses it, or maybe I give it to a few friends I'm going to China with. And I think blockchain technologies can take advantage of the same fundamentals that they can basically, we can say, let's start little nodes that only have 20 or 30 people going through them and use those nodes to access the wider internet, and maybe access ideally a Nym mixnet, because that's actually anonymous where you're going, right? So you enter a gateway. That gateway is essentially a shadow socks, or I think it's, what's the new one? V1 Ray and Trojan. It's some sort of new protocol that's somehow not censored yet, but maybe not super secure. But it looks like traffic that isn't necessarily dangerous. Doesn't look like Tor traffic. You do that first hop, and then you blast out. And then the problem you've always had with anonymous proxies and with this kind of philosophy is like, well, why would you run these things, right? And this is where blockchain technology and Web3, as controversial as, has a lot to say, because it says, well, we'll pay people. We can have an automated system to algorithmically pay people for running these kind of nodes. And I think that's great. So that, if a node goes down, let's say I want to access the VPN, and this is where dVPN technology like Sentinel may have a very important role to play. And I remember looking at them. I think they were the only ones that supported shadow socks in the first hop. That, I want to hop out, and my node I was hopping to got censored, so someone else was paid a little bit of, I don't know, cryptocurrency to run up a new node really quickly. So you always have the kind of these a sort of, rather than trying to hide against Chinese or even in the future American machine learning, instead you basically have a swarm of many nodes and incentive systems so that people are comfortable starting and running and maintaining those nodes and keeping those nodes small. And I think that's going to be a more effective way to block cryptocurrency transactions than any other way. To not allow cryptocurrency transactions to other kinds of communication from being censored and blocked.
Got it. Well, with that being said, with state level actors potentially becoming interested in this network, is there any fear of, regulators coming down and shutting you down, especially as a core development team building this technology?
Yeah, well, I mean, we are pushing very hard to launch mainnet and decentralize it, so we don't, we have less and less control over, so that should not really matter to the future of the network. That being said, if you look at, for example, a lot of government guidance, FinCEN, the U.S. regulatory body, says it's legal to run an anonymizing network. It is not legal to do something illegal over it. And one thing that they classify as illegal is like all of DeFi, for example, seems to require, at least by U.S. regulations, a money transmitter license. So we're not U.S., we're Swiss-based. Switzerland tends to have a better legal framework, more cryptocurrency friendly, more open, more innovation friendly than the United States. That being said, yeah, of course we're concerned. Why we wouldn't be concerned? So while what we are doing is, I think, very clearly legal, if I were another project, particularly a DeFi project, I'd be very concerned right now. And I think, and our solution is basically to make sure we have a clear home jurisdiction, Switzerland, which supports us, just made a statue of Chelsea Manning in Geneva, and privacy-friendly regulations. And we have a lot of lawyers. I've been doing climate change activism. I'm doing anarchist activism. I've had a lot of legal problems in my life before starting Nym. And there's one thing I feel perfectly comfortable with. It's dealing with legal problems. And the way you deal with them is you have a good strategy, you have good lawyers, and I have the highest confidence in our current legal strategy and lawyers.
Got it.
I would not start a DeFi company in the U.S. right now, just to be clear. I think it's terrible idea. So I'm actually more worried for them than us, but we'll see how it all pans out.
Yeah, fair enough. I feel bad for Uniswap right now.
Yeah, I can imagine they're going through lots of pain. I mean, I don't personally engage in DeFi. I'm too busy working on Nym. I'm not a finance person. I don't give financial advice, definitely not live on TV. Yeah, I can imagine that, Do Kwon has been a great guy. He is one of the people that kind of pointed us to CosmWasm, and it's terrible what they did to him. I think it's a jurisdictional overreach. And we have to just, support each other and make sure we get through what may be a crazy to be honest, generational shift, as a bunch of boomers just have to get used to the fact that crypto's here to stay. And so I've been actually very irritated with this latest round of anti-crypto backlash. What was that? Various people basically say, oh, it's all scam. It's all, I mean, yeah, and there's lots of Ponzi schemes and scams, particularly on Ethereum. I'm not going to argue. I haven't actually seen that many scams on Cosmos. I'm sure they exist, but I haven't seen any.
They're not here yet.
They're not here yet. Maybe they'll come when Adam pumps. And one thing that Adam, which irritates us at Nym, which is what may prevent that, is Adam doesn't really have like a finite supply. It's just kind of emitted to keep the 60 the PBFT running, and so that actually naturally keeps the price down, which is against Nym is more algorithmic, so we couldn't do that. But it's definitely going to keep Cosmos from being a total scam fest, at least for a while. That being said, I do think, we're going to have more and more legal issues. We're going to have more and more personal issues. And I've been very impressed by the work of DAOs, for example. I don't know. I mean, I'm very skeptical on DAOs as a governance entity. Nym is a company, and we will remain a company. Maybe we'll transfer into a foundation or DAO, but most foundations I've seen in the crypto space, Tezos come to mind, have gone horribly, horribly wrong. Interchain seems fine, though. But I do think we should start thinking about how we can collect and collectivize legal self-defense as a public good for the crypto community. Because we are building a new round of innovation. I'm pretty upset at all of the boomers that are against it, because the way they say, oh, it's just a giant scam. I was like, guys, first thing, there's valid technology here. I also thought it was a scam, but then I started, look, zero knowledge proofs, wonderful technology. Tendermint, it's as stable as MySQL. It's a perfectly fine PBFT system. Nym is a mixnet, something the Cypherpunks and us have been trying to build for like 20 or 30 years. There's actually, I mean, regardless of the whole space, there's a subset of incredibly amazing technology being built. And all of this technology could be under threat. And so we need to have collective, essentially legal self-defense. And maybe a DAO is a good way to run it. I mean, I've been impressed by how much money they've raised for things like, I don't know, constitutions. And I recently had some friends who were start up at a Julian Assange DAO to help him pay his legal bills, seeing how it worked out for Ross Ulbricht, and Snowden and Tor fundraised off this stuff. So I think there might be something there. To be honest, I'm too busy with Nym to work on it too much, but I do hope other people who are concerned about the legal issues, particularly from the DeFi space, get together and start working on some sort of DAO to get them all out of jail.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't allow any of our people to be scapegoated in this landscape, because we do have to remember that the final boss is ultimately the governments themselves that are trying to stifle this innovation. Yeah,
I can tell a little funny story there. We've had a lot of support. Interchain and Cosmos ecosystem has been wonderful. I remember one of the people that convinced me to do Nym was Zaki Manayan. We had dinner, and he said, look, he went to a European Commission meeting to help push for the fact that we could put this technology to use on blockchain. And this was way early days. This is like 2017 and 16 in Cosmos space, very early. So Zaki's been great. We've had lots of support. We've really enjoyed working with Interchain. CosmWasm team has been absolutely wonderful to work with. And to be honest, our only supporter from the Ethereum Foundation was this ex-Tor employee called Virgil Griffith, who, we were getting our testnet running, and I messaged him and I said, hey, Virgil, we got our testnet running. Maybe you want to try it out. Maybe build something on Ethereum or run a node or something, because everyone else in Ethereum, they were throwing money at all sorts of weird scams. There's a total scammy copycat of Nym on Ethereum, for example. And, Virgil was smart enough that he could tell the difference. And, he got the message. And then I think that later the next day, I didn't know. I mean, he got off an airplane and went to jail. Right. So this can happen to anyone. And that's why it's really important to collectivize some form of legal self-defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got to free Virgil as well. I think he's being held unfairly.
Yeah, and I hope it doesn't happen to anyone in the Cosmos ecosystem, but you never know. That being said, I think what Cosmos, maybe we can end on this, what Cosmos really has going for it is that we looked at a lot of different blockchain systems. I mean, we looked at so many. And okay, this was months ago, or maybe more than a year ago. And there was a lot of hype, and most of it didn't work. And I said, well, look, the only thing, I mean, I'm honestly a bit of maybe a cryptocurrency boomer myself. I said, well, at least Bitcoin works, so maybe we can try building off that. But then our CTO discovered Cosmos, the Cosmos SDK, and I was at first skeptical, but then it ended up really working and being super useful and saving us tons of time and pushing the network out, allowing us to concentrate our energies on the mixnet and not have to, for example, build a smart contract language or anything crazy like that. And so I think Cosmos does have a lot going for it. I don't think it should try to be a general purpose cryptocurrency. Like Atom should be used for staking on Atom and making the Cosmos Hub work. That's a great use case. That's valuable enough. You should have one sort of thing per use case. But I do think that Cosmos technology, I have to admit, of all the blockchain tech I've seen, is the only one outside of Bitcoin that actually works out the box really well and I can rely on. And then watching them add CosmWasm and WebAssembly support has been super amazing, because it's also a lot of blockchains, they stop innovating at a certain point, and Cosmos is clearly still innovating.
Absolutely. And with that happy note, let's close out, because we've been talking almost an hour and 30 minutes now. So thank you, Harry, for the amazing insights that you've offered us today. And where can people find you?
Yeah, so we're at Nym Tech. That's NymTech, NYMTECH.net. We're on Twitter as Nym Project, NYMPROJECT. And we have, from there, you can find the usual sort of Telegram, Medium, YouTube, and most importantly, the developer docs to check out.
Absolutely. Well, thank you everyone for tuning into Interchain FM today. This was a great talk and a great way to kick off the year. We've got interviews lined up every single Thursday. Next week, we're having Lex Avellino of Strange Clan, which is an NFT gaming play in Cosmos. So come to see that next Thursday, and I'll see you next week, guys. Bye.
Take care.